At the courthouse, my husband's family confidently declared that I would never get a single penny from them again. His sister and his mistress sneered at me, claiming I did not deserve a thing. My attorney stepped forward and handed a sealed envelope to the judge. He read through a few lines, then suddenly burst into loud, genuine laughter. He looked up and said, "This is good!" In an instant, the entire family's faces turned pale with sheer fear. Before I tell you how I brought them to their knees, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to use the rules against someone who tried to break you. My name is Valerie. I am 34 years old and I run a highly sought-after crisis management and public relations agency right here in Atlanta, Georgia. I spend my days fixing disasters for high-profile clients. I manage scandals, control narratives, and ensure the city's elite maintain their pristine reputations. I had spent years perfecting my craft, building a brand that meant everything to me, pouring my soul into every project. I never imagined the most devastating crisis of my life would happen inside my own marriage. It started on a humid Friday evening. I was managing the biggest charity gala of the season at an exclusive ballroom downtown. The room was packed with local celebrities, prominent politicians, and wealthy donors. Everything had to be perfect. The champagne was flowing, the string quartet was playing, and my team was running the auction flawlessly. I was standing near the entrance when the catering manager approached me. She had a tight, nervous smile on her face. She pulled me aside and handed me the final invoice. It was for $50,000. This was standard procedure. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my corporate credit card. This card was linked directly to the joint business account I shared with my husband Derek. Derek was 38 years old and worked as a senior logistics director for an international corporation. He was handsome, charming, and always seemed to have everything under control. He always handled the financial side of my firm, so I could focus entirely on my clients. I handed the card to the caterer and went back to adjusting the seating chart for the mayor. 2 minutes later, the catering manager returned. Her face was pale. She pulled me away from the crowd and whispered that the card was declined. I laughed softly, assuming it was a simple bank security flag. I told her to run it again. She walked away and I returned to my duties. But then she came back a second time. She shook her head and handed the card back to me. It declined a second time. My heart began to race. I pulled out my phone and dialed Derek's number. It rang 3 times and went straight to voicemail. I called again immediately. Straight to voicemail. A cold wave of panic washed over my body. The caterer was staring at me, and the venue coordinator was hovering nearby. If this payment did not go through right now, the staff would stop serving food. The charity would be humiliated, and my agency's hard-earned reputation would be destroyed overnight in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. I did not have the luxury of time to panic. My public relations instincts kicked in immediately. I grabbed my purse, pulled out my personal emergency credit card, and hoped the limit was high enough to cover this massive expense. It was a completely separate account I kept for extreme emergencies, funded entirely by money I had saved years before I even met Derek. I handed it to the caterer and prayed silently. The credit card machine beeped and the payment was approved. I exhaled a shaky breath, signed the receipt, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and walked back into the ballroom with a perfect, unbothered smile. For the next 2 hours, I continued to work as if nothing was wrong. I directed the valet service calm down, demanding VIP guests, and ensured the charity auction raised record-breaking funds. The extravagant floral centerpieces and the towering ice sculptures seemed to mock my internal distress as I forced myself to keep moving. On the outside, I was the picture of absolute control. On the inside, my stomach was twisting into painful, anxious knots. Why had the corporate card declined so suddenly? We had more than enough money in that account just yesterday. Why was Derek ignoring my calls? As soon as the final guest departed and my staff began the cleanup process, I retreated to an empty corner of the venue kitchen. I opened the banking application on my phone to check the joint corporate account. What I saw on that screen made the breath leave my lungs entirely. The available balance was practically zero. I refreshed the application thinking it must be a glitch. The numbers did not change. I scrolled down to the recent transactions list, my fingers trembling slightly. Yesterday afternoon, there was a massive outgoing wire transfer. Exactly $50,000 had been moved out of our corporate account. It was not a bank error. Derek had personally initiated a wire transfer to a domestic limited liability company I had never heard of before. I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was looking at. We had built this business together, but the money in that account came directly from my hard work. The amount of trust I had placed in him felt incredibly foolish now staring at the hard evidence of his deception. How could he possibly transfer $50,000 without telling me first? My mind raced through a dozen different scenarios. Derek worked in corporate logistics and was always talking about expanding our wealth. Maybe he had made a sudden aggressive investment in real estate. Maybe he had panicked about a stock market tip and moved the money to protect it. But even if that were true, why would he ignore my phone calls? Why would he leave me stranded at the biggest event of my career with a declined credit card? I called him a third time. The line went straight to voicemail again. I texted him asking him to call me immediately because there was a massive emergency with the bank. The message showed as delivered on my screen, but there was no reply. The silence from him was deafening. I needed answers right now. I felt sick. I could not wait for him to casually call me back in the morning. I opened the family location tracking application on my smartphone. We had installed it years ago for safety reasons during our frequent business trips. I fully expected to see his location pin at his downtown corporate office, perhaps working late on a Friday night to fix whatever financial mess he had just gotten us into. Instead, the small blue dot on the map showed he was exactly 8 miles away from the city center. He was not at the office working. He was at our multi-million-dollar home in the affluent neighborhood of Buckhead. Anger flared hot and bright in my chest, replacing the cold panic from earlier. He was sitting comfortably at home while I was standing in a commercial kitchen having a near panic attack over a declined caterer's bill. I grabbed my purse, gave a few final instructions to my lead assistant, and sprinted out the back exit toward the parking lot. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my car, started the engine, and peeled out of the parking garage. The drive from downtown Atlanta to our home in Buckhead usually took at least 30 minutes in heavy traffic. I navigated the busy streets with aggressive determination and made it there in 20. My heart pounded. The night air was thick and humid, clinging to my skin as I replayed every single interaction we had shared over the past week. My mind was spinning with all the things I was going to say to him when I walked through that door. I was ready to confront him about his blatant financial irresponsibility. I was ready to yell at him for making a terrible impulsive investment without consulting his wife and business partner. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I thought I was driving home to a husband who had simply made a stupid business mistake. I thought we would argue, he would apologize, and we would spend the weekend moving the money back into the correct accounts. I had absolutely no idea that I was actually driving toward the brutal, humiliating end of my marriage. The elegant brick houses and manicured lawns of our neighborhood passed by in a blur, standing in stark contrast to the storm brewing inside my head. I had no idea that the missing $50,000 was just the very beginning of a massive, calculated betrayal orchestrated by the man I loved and the deeply toxic family I had married into. As I turned onto our tree-lined street, the real nightmare was just waiting to begin. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, dark shadows across the driveway as I pulled my car to an aggressive halt. I stepped out of my car, and the heavy bass of a familiar rhythm and blues track immediately hit my chest, reverberating through the humid Atlanta air. I stared at my own front lawn in absolute disbelief. Luxury vehicles lined both sides of our manicured street, stretching down the block. A private valet stand was set up right at the edge of my property, complete with attendants rushing to open doors for arriving guests. I walked up the long driveway, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the concrete, and pushed open the custom iron gates leading to our expansive backyard. What I saw made my blood run entirely cold. A massive, fully catered barbecue was in full swing around our infinity pool. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried silver trays of miniature crab cakes and premium craft cocktails. A massive floral arrangement arched over a temporary wooden stage where a live jazz band played smoothly into the night. At least 80 people were gathered, laughing loudly and drinking heavily. I recognized my husband's extended family, his old fraternity brothers, and members of his mother's exclusive social clubs. My $50,000 had not vanished into a bank error. It had funded a lavish, ridiculous party, thrown in my own backyard without my knowledge. I stood frozen at the edge of the patio, trying to process the sheer audacity of the scene unfolding in front of me. My eyes scanned the massive crowd until they landed on my mother-in-law, Yvette. She was holding court by the poolside cabana, wearing a brand-new custom-tailored designer dress that I knew cost thousands of dollars. Beside her stood my sister-in-law, Renee, casually sipping a colorful martini and adjusting a thick diamond tennis bracelet that definitely had not been in her jewelry box last week. They looked like royalty presiding over a kingdom they did not build. I marched toward them, my anger mounting with every single step I took across the stone patio. Renee spotted me first. Her eyes raked over my tailored worksuit, taking in my tense posture and the fact that I was clearly not dressed for a festive gathering. She smirked, nudging her mother to look in my direction. "Look who finally decided to stop working and join the family," Renee announced loudly, ensuring the nearby guests could hear her clearly. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink. "Maybe if you spent less time at the office, Derek would not look so exhausted all the time. A real wife knows how to be present for her husband." Yvette nodded in agreement, her face set in that familiar mask of polite disdain she always reserved for me. "We were beginning to think you lived at your agency, Valerie," she added smoothly, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I told Derek he needed to host a proper gathering since his wife is always too busy to maintain family connections. The caterers have been wonderful, though. You really should try the imported lobster tails before they run out." I completely ignored their malicious jabs. My eyes darted around the extravagant setup, mentally calculating the sheer cost of the imported seafood, the premium liquor flowing from the open bar, the live band, and the newly purchased designer outfits Yvette and Renee were flaunting so proudly. They were spending my money. They were using the funds I had bled for to mock me in my own home. I did not waste my breath arguing with them. I turned on my heel and pushed my way through the crowded patio, frantically searching for my husband. I finally found Derek standing near the outdoor bar. He was holding a heavy glass of aged bourbon, laughing loudly with his cousins, effortlessly playing the role of the generous, successful host. He wore a brand-new tailored linen suit and an expensive gold watch I had never seen before. He looked completely carefree, completely unbothered by the fact that he had left me stranded, panicked, and humiliated across town. "Derek," I said. My voice was low, but it cut sharply through the noise of the party. He turned around, and for a fraction of a second I saw a flash of genuine panic in his eyes. He quickly masked it with a wide, charming smile that did not reach his eyes. "Valerie, baby, you made it," he said enthusiastically, reaching out to pull me into a tight embrace. I stepped back instantly, firmly refusing his touch. The smile on his face faltered. His cousins awkwardly cleared their throats and slowly backed away into the crowd, sensing the sudden dangerous tension radiating between us. "Inside," I said, pointing rigidly toward the back door of our house, "right now." Derek sighed heavily, rolling his eyes as if I were a difficult child throwing an unnecessary tantrum. He set his bourbon glass down on the bar counter and followed me inside, sliding the heavy glass door shut behind us, to block out the loud music and the chatter of his guests. As soon as we were standing in the quiet isolation of our sprawling kitchen, I turned to face him fully. "Where is the $50,000, Derek?" I demanded. My voice shook with suppressed rage and exhaustion. I was just humiliated at my own charity gala because the corporate card declined in front of the caterer. I had to empty my personal emergency fund to stop the staff from walking out and ruining my reputation. "You drained our joint account today." Derek crossed his arms defensively and leaned against the marble island, looking incredibly bored by my distress. You are overreacting, Valerie. Like always. I moved some funds around for a major business opportunity. It is a family commercial real estate venture. I secured a brilliant investment that is going to set us up for life. You are always talking about expanding our portfolio, so I took the initiative to handle it. I stared at him, absolutely disgusted by the ease with which he lied to my face. An investment, I repeated, my tone dripping with pure sarcasm. You drained my agency account for a real estate investment on a Friday afternoon without telling me, and then ignored my calls while I was trying to save my biggest event of the year. Do you really think I am stupid? I did not ignore your calls, he shot back, his voice rising in aggressive defense. My phone died. And yes, real estate deals move incredibly fast in this city. You have been so obsessed with your little business that I had to make an executive decision for our future. My mother and sister found a prime commercial spot, and we needed capital to secure the lease immediately. You should be thanking me right now. I stepped much closer to him, refusing to back down from his intimidation tactics. Thanking you. You stole $50,000 from our business account to fund a massive backyard barbecue and buy luxury designer dresses for your mother and sister. You took my hard-earned money so you could play the big shot provider for your family while leaving me to deal with the fallout. Derek scoffed loudly, shaking his head in mock disbelief. You are being completely hysterical. The party was just a small celebration for securing the commercial lease today. My family deserves to celebrate this win. They have supported me through absolutely everything. And frankly, Valerie, since you refuse to give my mother a grandchild, the least we can do is involve them in our financial success. Do not try to make me the villain here just because you are too selfish to share what we have. His words were a calculated, deliberate strike at my deepest, most painful vulnerability. He knew exactly how much I had struggled with fertility over the years. He knew how many painful, exhausting medical treatments we had endured together. Using that trauma as a weapon to justify stealing my money was a level of cruelty I had never seen from him before. My chest tightened painfully, and the breath caught sharply in my throat. I stared at the man I had married, suddenly realizing I did not know him at all. While he continued to talk, throwing out vague corporate buzzwords about equity asset management and family legacy, I noticed his smartphone resting on the kitchen counter, right next to his hand. The screen was facing upward. I had always respected his privacy during our marriage, but right now, I did not care about personal boundaries. As he lectured me loudly about my supposed selfishness, the screen on his phone lit up brightly with a new text message notification. My eyes darted instinctively to the display. The incoming message was from a contact saved simply as Dominique. I read the text message silently as it scrolled clearly across the locked screen. The spa looks gorgeous, baby. Your sister was right, this location is perfect. I cannot wait to show you the new VIP room later tonight. The words burned into my brain like acid. The spa, the location, the VIP room, baby. The realization hit me with the crushing force of a physical blow. The $50,000 had not gone toward a legitimate family commercial real estate venture. It had not gone toward securing our financial future or building an investment portfolio. Derek had taken the money straight from my business account to fund a luxury spa for his mistress. My mind rapidly pieced the devastating puzzle together. His sister Renee knew all about this affair. She had actively helped this woman find the commercial location using my money. Yvette probably knew as well. They were all in on the deception. My husband, his mother, and his sister had conspired together to drain my corporate account to finance a business for another woman. They were outside right now, drinking my expensive champagne and eating my catered food, fully aware that they were systematically destroying my life. Derek finally noticed my sudden eerie silence. He followed my gaze down to the kitchen counter. He saw the illuminated screen of his phone displaying the damning message. Panic finally shattered his calm, arrogant facade. He lunged forward frantically and snatched the phone off the marble island, quickly shoving it deep into his pocket. His face drained of all color, and he suddenly looked exactly like a cornered animal, realizing it had been caught. "Valerie," he stammered, raising his hands defensively in front of him. Let me explain this to you. It is not what you think it is. That is just a simple miscommunication with a new contractor. I did not scream. I did not throw anything across the room. The intense rage inside me had completely bypassed explosive and settled into something utterly freezing and dangerously absolute. I looked at Derek, the man I had happily built a life with, the man who had just viciously blamed my painful fertility struggles for his theft, and I felt nothing but pure, unadulterated contempt. I did not need to hear his pathetic, scrambling excuses. I did not need to ask who Dominique was or how long this had been happening. The evidence was right in front of me, undeniable and utterly damning. He had callously used my hard-earned money to set up another woman, and his toxic enabling family had cheered him on every single step of the way. I took a very deep breath, steadying myself as my mind shifted entirely into survival mode. This was no longer just a marital betrayal. It was a formal declaration of war. I turned away from him without saying a single word in response. I walked out of the kitchen past the blaring music of the backyard party and straight toward the front door. I needed to find this Dominique. I needed to see exactly what my $50,000 had purchased in Midtown Atlanta. I was going to tear this entire family apart brick by brick, and I would not stop until they had absolutely nothing left. I turned away from him without saying a word in response. I walked out of the kitchen, past the blaring music of the backyard party, and straight toward the front door. I needed to find this Dominique. I needed to see exactly what my $50,000 had purchased in Midtown Atlanta. I was going to tear this entire family apart, brick by brick, and I would not stop until they had absolutely nothing left. I walked out the front door and got straight into my car. I did not scream. I did not throw any plates at all. I did not give Derek or his toxic family the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I sat behind the steering wheel in the dark. The address from his phone burned permanently into my memory. I drove to a nearby hotel, checked myself into a quiet suite using my emergency credit card, and sat awake for the entire night. I watched the city skyline glow against the dark sky, my mind operating with terrifying clarity. When the sun rose over the horizon, I drove straight into Midtown Atlanta. I navigated the busy morning traffic until my navigation system directed me to pull over on a prime commercial street. I parked my car and looked at the storefront directly in front of me. It was a luxury day spa. The exterior was flawless, featuring custom frosted glass windows, sleek gold lettering, and imported black marble framing the entrance. It screamed wealth and incredibly expensive taste. It was exactly the kind of pretentious place Renee would brag about visiting, and my $50,000 had just paid for it. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped inside. The air conditioning was perfectly chilled, smelling faintly of eucalyptus and essential oils. The interior was breathtaking. Custom velvet seating areas were arranged neatly across the room. A massive crystal chandelier hung elegantly over the reception desk, and rows of premium skincare products lined the illuminated glass shelves. I stood there in silence, calculating the cost of the custom hardwood flooring and the high-end lighting fixtures. I quickly realized that Derek's theft went much deeper than a single wire transfer. He had been funding this place for months. I walked confidently toward the front desk. A woman was standing behind the polished marble counter, typing quickly on a sleek computer. She had her back to me. When she turned around to greet me, the breath caught sharply in my throat. I knew her. I recognized her instantly. It was Dominique. She was 26 years old and used to work as a junior receptionist at Derek's corporate logistics firm. Now she was standing in the middle of a luxury spa in Midtown Atlanta, wearing a tailored silk blouse and acting like she owned the world. "Welcome to the Diamond Spa," Dominique said smoothly, flashing a bright, practiced smile before she actually focused on my face. When she recognized who I was, the smile did not completely fade. Instead, it shifted into a slow, arrogant smirk. She did not gasp in shock. She did not try to hide or apologize. She leaned forward against the marble counter, resting her hands on the smooth surface, looking at me with pure confidence. "Hello, Valerie. I was wondering when you would finally figure it out and show up here." I stared at her, my eyes moving over her smug face, and then I saw them. Hanging perfectly from her earlobes were two flawless princess-cut diamond earrings. My diamond earrings. The exact pair Derek bought for our 5th anniversary. The pair I frantically searched for last month when they suddenly went missing. He had told me I must have misplaced them during a busy business trip. My own husband had stolen my anniversary diamonds out of my bedroom to give them to his 26-year-old former receptionist. I kept my voice incredibly calm, refusing to give her the dramatic emotional reaction she clearly wanted. "You are wearing my jewelry, Dominique, and you are standing in a building funded by my stolen money. I hope you know that none of this actually belongs to you." Dominique let out a short, highly amused laugh. "Oh, Valerie, you are so smart, but you are so incredibly blind. This is not your building. The commercial lease is registered entirely in my name. The limited liability company is solely mine. Derek made sure of that. He said a beautiful woman deserves to be a business owner, not a worker. He funded the entire build-out because he believes in my vision. He told me you were too obsessed with your own public relations agency to ever help him build an empire, so we built one together without you." Her words were specifically designed to cut deep, but I felt only a freezing, calculating rage spreading through my veins. I looked around the lavish reception area again. "You honestly believe he built an empire for you?" I asked, my tone dripping with quiet pity. "He wired $50,000 from my business account yesterday just to keep the lights on in this place. You are not a powerful owner, Dominique. You are simply a financial liability he is financing with stolen funds. When the money runs out today, this entire fantasy will collapse." Her smug expression hardened instantly. She stepped out from behind the reception desk, walking fully into the center of the lobby area. She was wearing a fitted designer skirt, and as she stood directly in front of me, she slowly, deliberately placed her hand flat against her lower stomach. She rubbed her stomach with a gentle, protective motion, her lips curling into a wicked, triumphant smile. "Derek wants a lasting legacy, Valerie," she said softly, her voice laced with pure venom. "He wants a real family to carry on his name. You are 34 years old now. You have spent your entire marriage chasing corporate clients and building your brand, but you could not give him an heir. He wants a child, so he found someone younger, someone better, someone who actually can give him what he needs as a man." She patted her stomach again, making sure I understood exactly what she was implying. The blow was vicious. The sheer cruelty of throwing my painful fertility struggles in my face was staggering. But I refused to let her see me bleed. "Oh, and by the way," she added casually, her eyes gleaming with malice as she delivered the final strike, "your sister-in-law, Renee, helped us pick out the decor for all the VIP treatment rooms. Yvette even came to the grand opening toast last week to bless the business. They both agree this is the best decision Derek has ever made. They have been waiting for him to leave you for months. They love me, Valerie. They chose me." The magnitude of the betrayal settled over me with absolute clarity. My husband had not just cheated, his entire family had actively participated in funding and hiding a secret life, a mistress and a new baby, all using my hard-earned money. They had smiled in my face at family dinners while picking out paint colors for the woman replacing me. I looked at Dominique, taking in her proud, defiant stance. I gave her a slow, chilling smile. "Enjoy the spa, Dominique. Enjoy the earrings. Enjoy the baby. Because you are going to need all the comfort you can get when the reality of who Derek really is finally hits you." I turned around and walked out the heavy glass doors. I walked straight to my car, my mind sharp and focused. The time for sadness was over. I started the engine and drove quickly toward Buckhead. I was going home to pack his bags and throw them directly onto the front lawn. He wanted a new life with his former receptionist. I would give it to him, but he would leave my house with nothing. Let us see how much his new family loved him when the stolen money ran dry. Let us see how supportive Yvette and Renee would be when they realized the financial bankroll they had been exploiting was permanently closed. Every tear I shed over my infertility, every moment I felt inadequate as a wife, evaporated into thin air. I pulled into my driveway, staring at the massive brick house I had paid the down payment for. The luxury cars from the party were gone. The caterers were gone. The house was quiet. I parked my car, grabbed my purse, and marched toward the front door with determination. I was ready to end this marriage. I reached for the brass handle. I was prepared to walk upstairs and drag his belongings down the stairs. As I slid my house key into the lock and twisted it, the mechanism refused to turn. I frowned, pulling the key out and sliding it back in again, jiggling the handle. It was jammed. My key no longer worked. The realization hit me just before the front door swung open. The heavy oak door did not just open. It was pulled back forcefully, revealing a scene so absurdly cruel that my mind temporarily stopped processing reality. Standing in the grand foyer of the home I had meticulously designed and largely paid for were my mother-in-law Yvette and my sister-in-law Renee. They were not alone. Flanking them on either side were two large, unsmiling men wearing matching black suits and earpieces. Private security. Yvette stepped forward, her posture rigid with an arrogant, triumphant authority. She was wearing a silk robe that I instantly recognized as one I had bought for myself during a trip to Milan. She wrapped it tighter around her waist and looked down her nose at me through the crack in the doorway. "You are not coming inside, Valerie," Yvette said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, devoid of any warmth or familial affection. She looked at me not as a daughter-in-law, but as a pest she was finally exterminating. I stared at her, my hand still holding the useless house key tightly in my palm. "What are you doing in my house, Yvette? Step aside. I need to get my belongings and I need to speak to my husband right now." Renee let out a sharp, nasty laugh from behind her mother. "Your house? That is hilarious. You really think you own everything, do you not? Well, you do not own my brother, and you certainly do not own this estate anymore." I stepped forward, intending to push my way past them into the foyer, but the two security guards immediately closed the gap. They stepped firmly into the doorway, their massive frames completely blocking my path. One of them raised a hand, his broad palm facing my chest. "Ma'am, I must ask you to step back from the property immediately," the guard said, his tone entirely professional, but laced with a clear, undeniable warning. I looked from the guards back to Yvette. My chest heaved as the adrenaline spiked through my veins, making my heart hammer against my ribs. "You hired private security to keep me out of my own home. Derek stole $50,000 from my business account to fund his mistress, and you are standing here locking me out." Yvette did not flinch. She did not look ashamed. Instead, she took a step closer to the threshold, her eyes narrowing with vicious, calculated malice. She looked me up and down, taking in my tailored work suit and my completely exhausted face. "A real woman knows exactly how to keep her man at home," Yvette stated, her voice dripping with pure venom. "You are just a selfish workaholic who thought your little public relations agency was more important than building a family. You ran around the city wearing designer clothes and attending fancy corporate galas, but you failed at your most basic duty as a wife. You could not even give me a single grandchild. Do you honestly blame my son for finding a woman who actually knows how to be a real mother?" The sheer cruelty of her words felt like a physical knife twisting deep in my ribs. She was deliberately using my deepest, most private medical trauma to justify her son's disgusting betrayal. We had spent years undergoing painful, invasive fertility treatments, and she was weaponizing that heartbreak against me. "Derek is a natural provider," Yvette continued, completely ignoring my silent shock. "He desperately wants a legacy. He wants a family that truly respects him, not a demanding business partner who constantly challenges his authority at every turn. Dominique is a sweet, traditional girl who completely understands her place. She is carrying my grandson right now. So yes, Derek is filing for divorce and we are protecting his valuable assets from your greedy hands. You are not going to ruin his future just because you are bitter, broken, and barren." Before I could even formulate a proper response to her disgusting, vitriolic speech, a fifth person stepped out from the shadows of the grand foyer. He was a plain-looking man, wearing a simple gray suit and carrying a thick manila envelope. He slipped past Yvette and the two security guards stepping out onto the front porch to stand directly in front of me. "Valerie," he asked, looking down at a small clipboard in his hand. I nodded numbly, completely paralyzed by the rapidly escalating nightmare unfolding before my eyes. "You have been officially served," the man said flatly. He thrust the thick manila envelope against my chest. Instinctively, my hands came up to grab it before it fell to the brick porch. The man immediately turned around, walked briskly past me, and headed down the driveway toward a parked sedan I had not noticed before. I looked down at the heavy envelope resting in my trembling hands. My full legal name was printed across the front in bold black letters. I ripped open the adhesive seal and pulled out the massive stack of complex legal documents. The header printed on the very first page made my blood run entirely cold. It was a formal petition for an emergency dissolution of marriage. Derek had officially filed for divorce, but that was not the worst part of the delivery. Attached to the divorce petition was a temporary restraining order signed by a Fulton County judge. I quickly scanned the legal jargon, my eyes darting across the paragraphs of completely fabricated accusations. Derek had claimed, under penalty of perjury, that I was financially erratic, emotionally unstable, and prone to violent, abusive outbursts. He claimed that he genuinely feared for his physical safety and the safety of his vulnerable unborn child. He had legally requested and had been summarily granted exclusive immediate access to our primary residence. "He lied to a judge," I whispered, staring blindly at the thick stack of papers. "He lied to a judge to steal my house." Renee scoffed loudly from the doorway, thoroughly enjoying my utter devastation. "He did what he had to do to protect his growing family from you. You are crazy, Valerie. Everyone in Atlanta knows you care about absolutely nothing but money and status. You would have drained the joint bank accounts and left him with nothing. We had to strike first and secure his property. Now pack up your designer purse and get off our property before we have these nice gentlemen arrest you for violating a direct court order." I looked up from the legal documents, my vision blurring slightly. The sky above us had darkened considerably, the heavy Atlanta humidity finally breaking under the weight of an incoming storm. A loud crack of thunder echoed menacingly in the distance, and the first few drops of rain began to fall, hitting the brick porch with heavy wet splats. "You are all going to pay for this," I said, my voice completely devoid of any hysterical emotion. It was not a desperate scream. It was not a wild, unhinged threat. It was a simple, absolute, unbreakable promise. You think you have won because you changed the locks and lied to a local judge. You think you can take my money, parade his pregnant mistress around my city, and throw me out into the street like garbage. But you have absolutely no idea what I am truly capable of doing to you." Yvette simply smiled, her cold, deeply arrogant smile. "Goodbye, Valerie." She stepped back into the house. Renee gave me one final mocking wave before pulling the heavy oak door completely shut. The deadbolt clicked loudly into place, echoing in the quiet, tense night. The two security guards remained standing firmly on the porch, their eyes fixed intently on me, waiting silently for me to make a move. The rain began to fall much harder now, soaking quickly into the fine fabric of my expensive work suit, pasting my dark hair to the sides of my face. I stood on the front porch of the beautiful house I had meticulously decorated. The house I had paid the massive down payment for, the house I had desperately tried to turn into a warm home for a family that never actually came. I was entirely legally locked out. I had absolutely nothing but the wet clothes on my back, my cell phone, my purse, and a stack of devastating legal documents telling the world I was a violent, unstable threat. I turned around and slowly walked down the long brick pathway. The rain was coming down in thick, freezing sheets, washing away the oppressive summer heat, but I barely felt the cold temperature against my skin. I walked past my perfectly manicured lawn, past the beautiful rose bushes I had planted myself last spring, and stepped out onto the wet asphalt of the quiet street. I reached my car, unlocked it with trembling fingers, and threw myself heavily into the driver's seat. I sat inside the dark, silent interior of my vehicle while the torrential rain hammered violently against the windshield. I was shivering, completely drenched, and utterly isolated from everything I had ever known. Derek had successfully orchestrated a brilliant, brutal, and calculated ambush. He had entirely drained my liquid business capital, secured a luxury commercial business for his young mistress, filed an emergency divorce with a falsified restraining order, and successfully removed me from my own marital property. He had weaponized the legal system to completely paralyze me before I even knew we were actively at war. He thought he had completely disarmed me tonight. He thought that by throwing me out into the freezing rain with absolutely nothing, I would simply break down, cry uncontrollably, and eventually accept whatever miserable, unfair financial settlement his expensive lawyers eventually offered. He clearly thought I was an incredibly weak, emotional woman. He forgot exactly what I did for a living every single day. I am a professional crisis manager. I dismantle catastrophic, high-stakes disasters for a living. I protect demanding billionaires and influential politicians from experiencing complete public destruction, and I destroy their powerful enemies with absolute terrifying precision. Derek had just made himself my primary, ultimate target. I reached for my wet purse, my hands fumbling slightly with the complicated leather clasp. I pulled out my smartphone and dialed a specific number I knew entirely by heart. It was almost midnight on a Friday, but I knew with absolute certainty he would answer the call. The line rang exactly twice before a deep, incredibly calm voice picked up on the other end. Valerie, the familiar voice said smoothly, "It is extremely late. Who exactly needs to be saved tonight?" I stared intensely through the rain-streaked windshield at the brightly glowing windows of my stolen house, feeling my sorrow morph entirely into pure rage. "I need to be saved, Julian," I said, my voice finally steadying into a sharp, lethal, and determined blade. "And I need to absolutely destroy my husband." I ended the call and pulled away from the curb. The freezing rain came down in heavy sheets as I drove through Atlanta. I navigated toward the downtown financial district, pulling into the parking garage of my public relations agency. I took the private elevator up. The office was dark and silent. I walked into my executive suite, took off my soaking blazer, and collapsed onto the leather sofa. I was shivering, exhausted, and running on adrenaline. I wrapped a throw blanket around my shoulders and stared at the ceiling for hours as the storm raged outside. I spent the night mentally cataloging every financial asset I had built and every corporate account Derek had access to. When the sun rose, I was sitting at my desk drinking black coffee and organizing the legal documents the process server had shoved into my chest. At precisely 8 in the morning, the glass doors of my executive suite swung open. Elijah walked into the room. He was the most ruthless, brilliant, and expensive divorce attorney in the entire state of Georgia. He wore a custom-tailored suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase. We had worked together on several high-profile crisis management cases over the past decade, handling wealthy politicians and corporate executives trapped in public scandals. Now I was the client. Elijah did not offer me any useless pity. He walked straight over to my desk, poured himself a cup of coffee from the silver carafe, and sat down directly across from me. He picked up the emergency divorce petition and the temporary restraining order. For 20 solid minutes, the only sound in the room was the crisp turning of pages as his eyes darted quickly across the dense legal jargon. I watched his face carefully. As he reached the final pages of the financial disclosures Derek had filed, a dark, dangerous frown settled over his sharp features. He placed the documents flat on the desk and folded his hands. "Valerie," he said, his voice deadly serious, "your husband is not just trying to divorce you and take the house. He has initiated a complete scorched earth financial execution. He is actively trying to bankrupt you so you cannot afford to fight him in court." I leaned forward, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. I knew Derek had drained my $50,000 corporate account to fund his mistress's luxury spa. I knew he had locked me out of the marital home to protect his assets. But I did not understand how he could possibly bankrupt my public relations agency. My firm was highly profitable, and I kept my operational funds in a separate trust that Derek could not access. I asked Elijah to explain what he meant. Elijah pulled a document from the middle of the stack and slid it across the glass desk toward me. It was a formal notice of federal bankruptcy. Derek had officially filed for Chapter 11 personal bankruptcy protection just 2 hours before he served me with the divorce papers. "Look at the liability declarations on page 4, Elijah instructed calmly. I scanned the page, my eyes landing on a massive, terrifying number printed in bold black ink: $2,500,000. It was listed as a defaulted commercial business loan. I read the details associated with the loan and my stomach dropped. The loan was tied directly to a joint marital limited liability company Derek and I had formed 7 years ago. We had created that specific corporate entity when we first got married, intending to use it for future real estate investments. I had forgotten about the dormant holding company. I never monitored it because Derek was the designated financial officer. He used our joint holding company to secure a $2.5 million commercial loan, Elijah explained. Because you are legally married and listed as a co-founder of that specific entity, you are jointly and severally liable for the entire debt. Derek has intentionally defaulted on the payments for the past 4 months. The loan is now in total default. The private equity firm holding the debt is preparing to send it to aggressive collections. I stared at the paperwork, the sheer magnitude of the betrayal washing over me in a suffocating wave. Derek had quietly leveraged our marriage to take out a multi-million-dollar loan, hid the money, and then deliberately stopped paying the mortgage to trigger a catastrophic financial collapse. By filing for personal bankruptcy, right as he filed for divorce, Elijah continued, Derek is legally shielding his own personal income from the creditors. The bankruptcy court places an automatic stay on his assets. That means the private equity firm cannot collect the $2.5 million from him. So they are going to come directly after the only other person responsible for the joint loan. They are going to come after you. The air in my office suddenly felt incredibly thin. I stood up and began pacing across the hardwood floor, my mind racing through the horrific implications. If a private equity firm came after me for a defaulted $2 million loan, they would legally seize my public relations agency. They would liquidate my corporate accounts, freeze my operational funds, and strip me of the business I had spent a decade building. I would lose absolutely everything I had worked for. He planned this perfectly, I whispered, staring out the window at the busy city streets below. He locked me out of my own house with no money, secured a fake restraining order, so I cannot even contact him, and now he is dropping a massive defaulted loan on my head. He knows I will have to spend every single dollar I have left trying to fight off the debt collectors. I will be too busy fighting bankruptcy to ever come after him. Elijah nodded slowly, his expression grim. It is a highly aggressive, deeply malicious strategy. He is weaponizing the legal and financial systems to completely paralyze you. His mother and sister likely helped him orchestrate the timing. They want you destitute, Valerie. They want you completely erased from his life. I stopped pacing and turned back to face my attorney. The shock and fear were rapidly burning away, replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless determination. Derek and his toxic family thought they could bury me under a mountain of fake debt. They thought they could break my spirit by leaving me homeless and terrified. But they made one massive miscalculation. They assumed I would cower and beg for a meager settlement to make the pain stop. How much time do we have before the private equity firm formally initiates the collection process against my agency? I asked, my voice completely devoid of any panic. Elijah checked his notes. The loan is held by a local firm called Apex Financial Partners. Given the timeline of the default, I would say we have roughly 3 weeks before they file the official motion to seize your business assets. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I picked up the bankruptcy filing and stared at Derek's forged signature at the bottom of the page. Apex Financial Partners. I knew exactly who ran it, and I knew they were currently dealing with their own massive liquidity crisis because of a scandal I had quietly helped suppress. Elijah, Fry said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the glass desk. Derek thinks this $2.5 million loan is a trap that will destroy me. But if he defaulted on the loan, that means the commercial property he purchased with the money is currently sitting in a highly vulnerable position. We need to find out exactly what he bought. We need to follow the deed immediately. Elijah smiled for the very first time that morning. It was a sharp, dangerous smile that promised absolute ruin for anyone standing in our way. "I am running the property records," he said, opening his sleek laptop. "It will take me a few hours to penetrate the shell companies he used to hide the purchase, but I will definitely find it." "Find it," I commanded, "because I am not going to file for bankruptcy, and I am not going to let him take my public relations agency. He wants to play high-stakes financial warfare with me." "Fine. We are going to find out exactly what he bought with my credit, and then we are going to take it right out from under him. I want my husband destroyed. I want his mother humiliated. I want his sister bankrupt. And I want that mistress on the street." We spent the rest of the morning charting our ruthless counterattack. I was no longer the heartbroken, betrayed wife crying in the rain. I was a powerful woman preparing to burn an entire toxic family to the ground. Elijah stared at me across the glass desk, his sharp eyes widening slightly as my words settled in the quiet room. Buying a defaulted $2 million commercial loan was not a standard defensive strategy in a divorce proceeding. It was a hostile corporate takeover. He leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands, waiting for me to elaborate. I walked back to my desk and pulled up the bankruptcy filing Derek had submitted. I pointed directly at the name of the private equity firm holding the massive debt: Apex Financial Partners. Derek chose them because they aggressively finance high-risk commercial developments across Atlanta. He assumed they would be a ruthless, unstoppable force that would immediately liquidate my public relations agency to satisfy the defaulted loan. But my husband only understands logistics and supply chains. He does not understand the hidden dirty reality of corporate reputations. Elijah raised an eyebrow, silently prompting me to continue. 2 months ago, I explained, keeping my voice perfectly level. The senior managing partner of Apex Financial found himself in the middle of a catastrophic scandal involving embezzled client funds and a highly illegal offshore gambling ring. He was facing a massive federal indictment that would have completely destroyed the firm. His board of directors panicked and hired my agency on a massive retainer to suppress the story, manage the media fallout, and quietly force the partner into early retirement before the federal investigators could build a solid public case. I leaned closer to Elijah, making sure he understood the absolute leverage I currently held. I saved Apex Financial from total public annihilation. Because of my crisis management strategy, they avoided a media frenzy and kept their wealthiest investors from pulling their capital. However, they are still bleeding liquidity behind closed doors. They are desperate for fast, quiet cash injections to balance their compromised ledgers. If a mysterious buyer suddenly approached them, offering to purchase a distressed, defaulted $2.5 million commercial loan for a lump sum of immediate cash, they would not ask any questions. They would sign the paperwork immediately, just to clear the bad debt off their books. Elijah let out a low, impressed whistle. He opened his laptop and began typing rapidly. "You want to execute a silent buyout of the Commercial Plaza debt?" he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "If you own the loan, you become the primary creditor. Yvette and Renee might hold the property deed, but they would legally owe the entire $2.5 million directly to you. But Valerie, you cannot buy this debt under your own name. If Derek or his lawyers trace the purchase back to you, they will immediately claim it as a marital asset or accuse you of hiding corporate funds during an active divorce." I smiled warmly, a genuine expression of absolute predatory confidence. "I am not going to buy it under my name, Elijah. I am going to form a blind trust. And I am not going to use my own money to fund the buyout. I am going to call in a very large favor." I picked up my smartphone and scrolled through my elite client contact list. I bypassed the local politicians and the reality television stars until I found the exact name I needed: Xavier Sterling. Xavier was a ruthless, fiercely intelligent billionaire who made his fortune in international telecommunications. Last year, his arrogant younger brother had crashed a luxury yacht while heavily intoxicated, nearly killing a prominent local official. I had worked for 72 straight hours to bury the police report, silence the witnesses with ironclad non-disclosure agreements, and protect Xavier's pristine corporate empire from a devastating public relations nightmare. Xavier had told me to name my price. I had billed him my standard executive rate, keeping his eternal gratitude safely in my back pocket for a rainy day. Today was a hurricane. I pressed the call button. Xavier answered on the second ring. Valerie, his deep, resonant voice, filled the quiet office. I hope you are calling to tell me you finally decided to drop your other clients and work for me exclusively. I need a massive favor, Xavier, I said, matching his professional, commanding tone. I need an immediate, untraceable capital injection of $2 million to execute a hostile debt buyout. I need the funds routed through a secure blind trust by tomorrow morning, and I need absolutely no digital connection to my public relations agency. There was a brief, calculating silence on the other end of the line. Xavier did not ask if I was in trouble. He did not ask for a business proposal or a guaranteed return on investment. He understood the currency of elite favors better than anyone in Atlanta. Send the routing details to my private financial director, Xavier replied smoothly. Consider the debt paid in full. Do you need my legal team to structure the blind trust for you? I looked at Elijah, who was already drafting the incredibly complex corporate documents on his laptop. I have the best legal counsel in the state handling the structure, I told Xavier. Thank you. I owe you. No, Valerie, Xavier corrected with a dark chuckle. You saved my family legacy last year. We are officially even. Burn whatever you need to burn. I ended the call and set the phone down on the glass desk. The financing was entirely secured. Now we had to execute the trap before Derek and his toxic family realized the ground beneath their feet was slowly turning into quicksand. Elijah worked relentlessly through the afternoon. He structured an impenetrable blind trust registered in Delaware, a state known for its fierce corporate privacy laws. The trust was legally designed to act as an aggressive independent debt acquisition firm. On paper, it looked exactly like a ruthless corporate entity looking to buy up distressed commercial loans for pennies on the dollar. There was absolutely zero connection to Valerie, the betrayed, devastated wife crying in the rain. By Tuesday morning, Elijah had arranged a highly confidential meeting with the executive board of Apex Financial Partners. We did not meet at their sprawling corporate headquarters. We met in a private soundproof conference room at an exclusive downtown business club. I walked into the room wearing a tailored charcoal suit projecting the absolute authority of a woman holding all the winning cards. The two remaining partners of Apex Financial looked exhausted, their faces lined with the heavy stress of their ongoing liquidity crisis. When they saw me walk into the room with Elijah, they immediately assumed I was there to discuss my ongoing public relations retainer. They had absolutely no idea they were about to sell me the instrument of my husband's destruction. Elijah took control of the meeting immediately. He presented a thick, legally binding acquisition proposal. He explained that a private, anonymous corporate client was highly interested in taking a specific defaulted commercial loan off their bleeding ledgers. The partners reviewed the file. It was Derek's $2.5 million loan for the Midtown Commercial Plaza, the same plaza that currently housed his pregnant mistress and enriched his arrogant mother and sister. My client is willing to purchase this distressed debt for $1.8 million in untraceable immediate liquid capital, Elijah stated coldly, tapping the proposal. The loan is in total default. The primary signatory has filed for personal bankruptcy, which means this debt is going to be tied up in messy federal litigation for years. You do not have the time or the liquidity to fight a lengthy bankruptcy battle. My client is offering you a clean, quiet, and instant exit. The partners exchanged a desperate, telling look. They knew Elijah was completely right. Derek's fake bankruptcy filing had made the commercial loan highly toxic. They needed cash immediately to appease their nervous investors, and $1.8 million in clean capital was a miraculous lifeline. They did not ask a single question about the identity of the anonymous buyer. They did not care. They just wanted the liability off their corporate books. Within 48 hours, the massive transaction was officially complete. The staggering sum of money moved silently from Xavier's private accounts into the Delaware Blind Trust and then directly into the accounts of Apex Financial Partners. The heavy formal legal documents transferring the complete ownership of the commercial debt were signed, stamped, and securely filed. I sat in Elijah's office late Thursday evening, holding the final certified copy of the debt assignment in my hands. The heavy, thick paper felt like pure, unadulterated power. I traced my finger over the printed address of the commercial plaza. Derek thought he was a genius. He thought he built a safe fortress for his new family by giving his mother and sister the building while leaving me with the mortgage. He was absolutely, completely, and utterly wrong. 2 weeks after I secretly purchased the $2 million debt, the mandatory divorce mediation was officially scheduled. In the state of Georgia, family court requires all divorcing couples to attempt a mediated settlement before a judge will ever hear the case at trial. Elijah had warned me that this meeting would be an absolute circus. He told me that Derek and his legal team would do everything in their power to intimidate me into signing a terrible agreement. I knew exactly what they were planning. They wanted me to surrender all my assets willingly, terrified by the looming threat of the fabricated commercial debt. I walked into the lobby of the upscale mediation center in downtown Atlanta, feeling a deep, vibrating sense of predatory calm. I wore a simple beige dress, minimal makeup, and styled my hair to look deliberately exhausted. I had spent my entire career managing optics for public figures. Today, I was managing my own. I needed to look like a woman who was on the verge of a total emotional and financial collapse. When Elijah and I stepped off the elevator, the heavy glass doors of the reception area slid open. The sight waiting for me in the lobby was almost comical in its blatant cruelty. Sitting on the plush leather sofas were Yvette and Dominique. They had absolutely no legal reason to be at a private divorce mediation. They were there strictly for the theater of it all. They were there to gloat. Yvette was wearing another brand new designer outfit, holding a cup of artisan coffee, looking like a wealthy matriarch who had just won the lottery. Beside her sat Dominique. My husband's 26-year-old former receptionist had made sure to wear a tight, stretchy maternity dress that prominently displayed her growing stomach. She rested her hands on her belly, stroking it constantly, making sure I saw the ultimate prize she had stolen from me. I kept my head down, letting my shoulders slump forward just a fraction. I allowed a look of absolute defeat to wash over my face as I walked past them. I heard Yvette let out a sharp, highly amused scoff. "Look at her," Yvette whispered loudly to Dominique, ensuring her voice carried across the quiet lobby. "She looks like she has not slept in a month." I told Derek that taking away her stolen money would break her spirit. "She finally realizes she is nothing without my son." Dominique giggled a high and grating sound that echoed off the marble walls. I kept walking silently, absorbing their toxic insults. Every cruel word they spoke was just another piece of fuel added to the massive fire I was preparing to unleash upon them. We entered the private mediation suite. A long mahogany table dominated the room. Sitting on the opposite side was Derek and his high-priced attorney. I almost laughed out loud when I saw my husband. Derek, a man who obsessively curated his wardrobe with imported Italian linen and custom silk ties, was wearing a cheap, slightly wrinkled gray suit that looked like he had purchased it straight off a discount rack. He had not shaved properly. He had dark circles under his eyes, clearly created with the help of a little makeup. He was playing the role of the devastated, financially ruined husband to absolute perfection. He was trying to convince the mediator that the global economy had destroyed his logistics career and left him destitute. The mediator, a neutral, stern-looking older woman, formally began the session. She explained the rules of engagement and asked Derek's attorney to present their initial settlement offer. The lawyer slid a thin, single-page document across the mahogany table toward Elijah. He folded his hands and looked at me with a deeply condescending expression. Valerie, Derek's attorney, began using a soft, patronizing tone that instantly made my skin crawl. "We all know this is a highly stressful, emotional time. Derek wants to be fair. He recognizes that the failure of his commercial real estate investments has placed a significant burden on the marital estate. He also recognizes that his personal bankruptcy filing complicates things. However, he is willing to offer you a very generous mercy deal to spare you from financial ruin. Elijah picked up the document and scanned it, his face remaining entirely blank. He passed it to me. I looked down at the proposed agreement. It was a masterpiece of absolute unadulterated greed. The terms were brutally simple. I would agree to sign a quitclaim deed formally surrendering any and all legal rights to our multi-million-dollar home in Buckhead. I would waive my right to seek any spousal support or alimony. I would agree to walk away from the marriage with absolutely nothing but the clothes on my back and the current balance of my public relations agency. In exchange for my complete surrender, Derek would nobly agree to assume full 100% responsibility for the $2.5 million commercial business loan. It was a spectacular scam. Derek was offering to take the massive debt to save me from having my business seized by the private equity firm. But I knew the truth. I knew he was actively filing for federal bankruptcy protection, which meant he fully intended to have a judge discharge that debt anyway. He planned to walk away from the loan entirely free and clear, leaving his mother and sister with the commercial plaza, moving his pregnant mistress into my house, and leaving me completely homeless and penniless. I looked up from the paper. Derek was watching me intently. He slumped forward in his chair, trying to look burdened and exhausted by the weight of the world. "Valerie," Derek said, pitching his voice to sound gentle and deeply apologetic. "I made some terrible financial decisions. I risked everything on that commercial loan and the market crushed me. The debt collectors are going to come for everything we own. I am trying to protect your public relations firm. If you just sign the house over to me, I can leverage it to keep the bankruptcy lawyers at bay. I will take the $2 million debt so you do not have to lose your company. Please just let me do this one good thing for you." It took every ounce of professional discipline I possessed not to leap across the table and physically attack him. He was lying straight to my face, using my own business as a hostage to steal my house. But I remembered the plan. I remembered the secret documents locked securely in Elijah's briefcase. I took a deep breath and channeled every client I had ever coached through a public scandal. I needed to give them a performance they would never forget. I forced my lower lip to tremble. I let my breathing become rapid and shallow, mimicking the exact symptoms of a severe panic attack. I looked down at my hands and started rubbing my fingers together nervously. I focused on the deep, authentic pain of my fertility struggles, the pain of finding out about Dominique, and the utter betrayal of my marriage. Real tears instantly welled up in my eyes. The tears spilled over my eyelashes and rolled hot and heavy down my cheeks. "Derek," I whispered, letting my voice crack and break with manufactured sorrow. "How could you do this to us? We built a beautiful life together. Why are you trying to take the house? It is the only thing I have left. I paid the down payment. I decorated the nursery. Please do not take my home." Derek shifted uncomfortably, but I saw the triumphant gleam in his eyes. He thought he was winning. He thought he had completely shattered me. "Valerie, you have to be realistic," he replied coldly, dropping the gentle facade now that he saw I was crying. "The house is gone. The money is gone. If you do not sign this agreement right now, the private equity firm is going to seize your agency tomorrow. You will have absolutely nothing. I am offering you a way out. Take the deal." I placed my hands on the table and let them shake visibly. I looked at the mediator, pleading with my eyes, acting like a desperate, terrified victim trapped in a nightmare. I looked back at Derek, sobbing openly now. "I loved you," I cried, wiping at my face and smudging my minimal makeup. "I gave you everything, and now your mother is sitting out there laughing at me. She told me I was not a real woman because I could not give you a baby. Why is she doing this to me? Why are you letting them treat me like this?" Derek's attorney sighed heavily, clearly annoyed by my emotional display. "Ma'am, this is a legal proceeding. We need a signature on the settlement agreement today, or we are going to walk away and let the creditors destroy your business." I leaned back in my chair, covering my face with my hands, sobbing uncontrollably into my palms. I let the sound of my weeping fill the quiet conference room. Through my fingers, I watched Derek's face. He looked incredibly satisfied. He sat up straighter in his cheap suit, the posture of a man who had successfully conquered his enemy. "I need a minute," I gasped, standing up abruptly. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. I rushed out of the conference room and stumbled into the hallway. The hallway led directly back toward the reception lobby. Through the glass partition, I saw Yvette and Dominique watching me. They had clearly heard the commotion. When they saw my tear-stained face, my ruined makeup, and my trembling shoulders, Yvette actually clapped her hands together in silent delight. Dominique smirked, rubbing her pregnant belly with aggressive pride. They fully believed they had broken me. They believed I was running out to the lobby to surrender. Elijah followed me out of the room, looking perfectly concerned. He handed me a tissue. I took it, wiped my face, and took a deep, shuddering breath. I stood in the hallway for exactly 2 minutes, letting the entire family soak in the glorious image of my utter defeat. I wanted them to remember this exact moment forever. I wanted them to feel entirely invincible. Then I turned around and walked back into the conference room. I sat down at the mahogany table. The tears were still wet on my cheeks, but my hands were suddenly perfectly still. I looked at Derek, who was holding a silver pen out toward me, ready for me to sign away my life. I looked down at the settlement agreement. I reached out and gently pushed the document back across the table toward his attorney. "No," I whispered, letting my voice sound small, broken but stubborn. Derek's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, no?" "I cannot sign it," I said, looking down at the table, refusing to meet his angry gaze. "I am too scared. I do not understand the bankruptcy laws. I do not trust you anymore, Derek. I need a judge to look at everything. I need a judge to tell me what to do. I will not sign away my house today." Derek's attorney slammed his hands on the table. "You are making a massive mistake, Valerie. If you push this to a trial, the private equity firm will seize your business before we even get a court date. You are choosing total financial suicide." I just shook my head slowly, acting completely paralyzed by fear and denial. "I am sorry. I just cannot do it. We have to go to trial, to..." Derek threw the silver pen across the table. It clattered loudly against the wood. "You are a fool, Valerie," he hissed viciously, abandoning his cheap act entirely. "You want to go to court? Fine. We will go to court. And I will sit there and watch the judge give me the house while the debt collectors take your precious company. You brought this entirely on yourself." He stormed out of the conference room, slamming the door behind him. I sat in my chair, listening to his angry footsteps fade down the hallway. I heard Yvette and Dominique laughing outside, celebrating my supposed stupidity. They thought my refusal to sign was just the desperate, illogical denial of a broken woman. They thought the upcoming trial would be my absolute execution. Elijah looked at me across the table. He reached over and quietly packed the unsigned settlement agreement into his leather briefcase. He met my eyes, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. I wiped the remaining tears off my cheeks. My sadness vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, thrilling anticipation. The trap was officially set. The trial was secured. I stood up, smoothing my beige dress perfectly. They had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. The reckoning would be absolute and merciless. I picked up my purse and walked out the door with my head held high, fully ready to utterly destroy my arrogant husband and his deeply toxic family. At the courthouse, my husband's family confidently declared that I would never get a single penny from them again. His sister and his mistress sneered at me, claiming I did not deserve a thing. My attorney stepped forward and handed a sealed envelope to the judge. He read through a few lines, then suddenly burst into loud, genuine laughter. He looked up and said, "This is good." In an instant, the entire family's faces turned pale with sheer fear. Before I tell you how I brought them to their knees, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to use the rules against someone who tried to break you. The night before the official divorce trial arrived with a heavy, suffocating humidity that blanketed the city of Atlanta. I was sitting at the massive glass desk in my executive suite, staring out at the glowing skyline. My public relations agency was completely empty and silent. My staff had gone home hours ago. Only Elijah and I remained, surrounded by stacks of legal binders and empty coffee cups. Tomorrow morning, we would walk into the Fulton County Courthouse and spring the trap. We were meticulously reviewing our strategy when my personal cell phone buzzed sharply against the glass desk. The sudden noise shattered the quiet focus of the room. I glanced down at the bright screen. I did not recognize the incoming phone number, but an image file had just been delivered. I unlocked the screen and opened the message. The photograph was taken inside the master bedroom of my Buckhead home, the very same home Derek had legally locked me out of using a fabricated restraining order. Sitting right in the middle of my custom-made imported Italian silk sheets was Dominique. Derek's 26-year-old mistress was wearing a silk nightgown, her hands cradling her heavily pregnant stomach. She had propped herself up against the custom velvet headboard I had personally designed. She was smiling directly at the camera with an expression of pure, arrogant triumph. Directly beneath the photograph was a short, incredibly malicious text message. Out with the old, in with the new. Thanks for paying the mortgage. I stared at the image of the young woman lounging in the bed where I had spent years crying over negative pregnancy tests. I stared at the woman who had happily conspired with my husband, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law to drain my business accounts and steal my life. 2 weeks ago, receiving this photograph would have completely broken my spirit. 2 weeks ago, I would have fallen apart sobbing over the sheer cruelty of her flaunting my stolen home and my painful fertility trauma. But tonight, I felt absolutely no sadness. I felt no heartbreak. I felt only a cold, thrilling sense of absolute power. Dominique thought she was delivering a crushing final blow to a defeated wife. She had absolutely no idea she was mocking the woman who now legally owned the ground she was currently resting on. Elijah noticed my prolonged silence. He looked up from his thick legal files and raised a questioning eyebrow. "Is everything all right, Valerie?" I turned the smartphone around and slid it smoothly across the glass desk so he could see the bright screen. "Everything is absolutely perfect, Elijah. Dominique just decided to give me a little extra motivation for tomorrow morning." Elijah leaned forward and read the text message. A dark, predatory chuckle escaped his lips as he pushed the phone back toward me. "The sheer arrogance of this entire family is going to make tomorrow so much sweeter. Are you going to respond to her?" I picked up the phone. I did not type a long, emotional paragraph. I did not express my anger or tell her she was a terrible person. I simply typed a single calm sentence. "Enjoy the house while you can." I hit send, blocked her phone number entirely, and placed the device face down on the desk. That was the absolute last time I would ever let that woman or that family attempt to disrespect me. I turned my attention back to the massive stack of legal documents resting between Elijah and me. We had a tremendous amount of work to finalize before the sun came up. We spent the next 8 hours drafting the official default and foreclosure notices for the Midtown Commercial Plaza. Because the Delaware Blind Trust I controlled had successfully purchased the $2.5 million commercial debt, I was now officially the primary creditor. Yvette and Renee were the registered owners of the property, but they were currently occupying a building that had been in severe financial default for over 4 months. Derek had deliberately stopped making the mortgage payments to trigger the financial collapse he intended to drop on my head. Now that intentional default was my greatest weapon. Elijah carefully drafted the heavy legal paperwork required to seize the commercial plaza. He detailed the exact dates of the missed payments, calculated the massive accrued interest penalties, and cited the specific Georgia state laws granting the primary creditor the immediate right to initiate a hostile foreclosure. Once I signed these specific documents on behalf of my blind trust, Yvette and Renee would instantly lose the multi-million-dollar building Derek had stolen for them. Furthermore, Dominique would immediately lose the commercial lease for her luxury day spa. She would be evicted from the premises before the end of the month. They were all going to lose their highly lucrative stolen kingdom. I reviewed every single line of the foreclosure notices with absolute precision. I checked the spelling of my mother-in-law's name. I verified the corporate registration numbers for my sister-in-law's holding company. I wanted the legal execution to be utterly flawless. I picked up my favorite gold pen and signed my name on the final page of the creditor authorization form. The ink flowed smoothly across the thick paper, cementing their ultimate financial doom. "It is done," I said, handing the thick folder back to my attorney. "Tomorrow, they are going to stand up in family court and swear under oath that they own the commercial plaza free and clear. And the second they do, we are going to drop this debt right on their heads. They will owe me $2.5 million, and when they cannot pay it, I will seize the building." Elijah nodded, taking the folder and carefully placing it inside his leather briefcase. "It is a brilliant ironclad strategy, Valerie." Derek completely outsmarted himself. He built a complex financial maze to hide his theft, and he ended up handing you the keys to his family's entire future. Elijah reached for the final stack of documents remaining on the desk. It was a massive box containing the original loan origination files from Apex Financial Partners. We had already reviewed the primary mortgage contracts earlier in the week, but Elijah was a notoriously meticulous attorney. He wanted to verify every single piece of supporting documentation one last time before we walked into the courthouse. He opened the heavy cardboard box and began sifting through the hundreds of pages of dense banking records, corporate guarantees, and real estate disclosures. I stood up and walked over to the corner of my office to pour us another cup of black coffee. The sky outside the window was beginning to turn a soft, bruised shade of purple as dawn slowly approached the city of Atlanta. The storm had finally passed, leaving the streets slick and quiet. I felt a deep, steady calm settle over my entire body. I was ready. I was ready to face Derek. I was ready to watch the arrogant smirk fall right off Yvette's face. I was ready to take back my life. I carried the 2 hot coffee mugs back to the desk. As I set them down on the glass surface, I noticed that Elijah had stopped moving entirely. He was staring intensely at a single wrinkled piece of paper he had just pulled from the very bottom of the banker's box. His eyes were darting rapidly across the text, his posture incredibly rigid. "Elijah," I asked, my voice cautious as I sat down slowly. "What did you find? Is there a problem with the loan transfer?" He did not answer me immediately. He read the document a second time, his lips moving silently as he processed the legal jargon. Then he slowly looked up at me. His expression was a mixture of absolute shock and pure, dangerous exhilaration. "Valerie," he said, his voice dropping to a hushed, disbelieving whisper, "I just found the original collateral rider attached to the $2.5 million commercial loan." I frowned, not fully understanding the implication. "What does that mean?" "We already know the commercial plaza is the collateral for the debt. We just drafted the foreclosure notices to seize the building." Elijah shook his head quickly. "No, Valerie, you do not understand. When Derek originally applied for this massive commercial loan 7 years ago, the bank required additional security because the joint holding company was brand new and had no established credit history. The commercial plaza itself was not enough collateral to satisfy the strict underwriting requirements at Apex Financial Partners. Derek had to pledge additional highly valuable assets to guarantee the $2 million. My heart began to race. What else did he pledge Elijah? Elijah slid the wrinkled paper across the glass desk toward me. He tapped his finger directly on the highlighted paragraph at the bottom of the page. Derek executed a cross-collateralization agreement. He used the equity in your primary marital residence to secure the commercial loan. He legally pledged the multi-million-dollar home in Buckhead as secondary collateral for the debt. I stared at the document, my mind struggling to process the massive, earth-shattering revelation. Derek had used my house, the house I had paid the down payment for, the house I had furnished, the house he currently occupied with his pregnant mistress, to guarantee the commercial debt. He had tied the 2 properties completely together, because he deliberately stopped making payments on the commercial loan 4 months ago. Elijah continued, his voice vibrating with absolute triumph. Both properties are now in total, irreversible default. The commercial plaza and the Buckhead house are inextricably linked by this single loan. And because your blind trust just purchased this exact debt, you are now the primary creditor for both assets. I looked up from the paper, my breath catching sharply in my throat as the true magnificent reality of the situation finally washed over me. By buying the distressed debt to save my public relations agency, I had not just purchased the right to seize the commercial plaza from Yvette and Renee. I had also unknowingly purchased the legal right to foreclose on my own marital home. He handed me the house. I whispered, my voice trembling with shock and sheer joy. Derek locked me out of the house, filed a fake restraining order, and tried to steal my property in family court. But none of that matters now. The family court does not control the house anymore because the house is in active foreclosure, and I am the bank holding the mortgage. Elijah leaned back in his chair and let out a loud, genuine laugh that echoed through the quiet office. He made a fatal, catastrophic mistake, Valerie. He tried to bankrupt you using a loan that was tied directly to his own safe haven. By becoming the creditor, you now essentially hold the keys to absolutely everything. You hold the commercial plaza, you hold the luxury spa, and you hold the Buckhead house. You own their entire world. I looked down at my phone resting on the glass desk. I thought about the cruel, mocking text message Dominique had sent me just a few hours ago. She had thanked me for paying the mortgage while sitting comfortably in my bed. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully stolen my entire life. I picked up the foreclosure documents we had just drafted for the commercial plaza. Elijah, I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face as the morning sun finally broke over the Atlanta skyline. We need to draft one more eviction notice before we go to court today. Dominique is going to need to start packing her bags immediately. Elijah nodded, opening a new blank document on his laptop. With pleasure, Valerie. Let us go take back your kingdom. The morning sun broke through the heavy Atlanta humidity as Elijah and I walked up the wide concrete steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. I wore a tailored navy blue suit. My posture was perfectly straight. I felt absolutely no fear. The exhaustion of staying awake all night had been completely replaced by a freezing, calculated adrenaline. We walked through the security checkpoints and took the elevator up to the family court floor. The long hallway was quiet until the elevator doors opened a second time. Derek, Yvette, Renee, and Dominique stepped out into the corridor. They looked like they were arriving at a red carpet premiere rather than a divorce trial. Yvette wore a custom Gucci suit with an oversized designer handbag resting on her forearm. Renee strutted down the hallway in a pristine Prada dress, her wrists heavy with expensive jewelry. Dominique walked closely beside Derek, deliberately pushing her pregnant stomach forward. She was wearing a highly inappropriate form-fitting designer gown that screamed newly acquired wealth. Derek wore a sharp, expensive dark suit, completely abandoning the cheap wrinkled outfit he had worn during our mediation session. They believed they had already won. They believed today was simply a legal formality before they officially claimed my entire life. As they walked past the wooden bench where Elijah and I were sitting, Renee leaned down slightly. Her heavy perfume filled the space between us. "I hope you brought a box for your desk supplies," Valerie Renee whispered, a vicious smirk playing on her lips. "Because after today, the debt collectors are going to take your little agency. Do not worry. Maybe Dominique will hire you to scrub the floors at her new spa." Yvette laughed out loud, a sharp, grating sound that echoed down the quiet courthouse hallway. Dominique smiled proudly and wrapped her arm tightly around Derek's waist. Derek did not say a word. He just looked at me with cold, arrogant pity before leading his new family into the courtroom. I did not react. I did not glare at them. I simply looked at Elijah, who gave me a very small, highly anticipated nod. We stood up and walked into the courtroom together. The courtroom was formal and intimidating, paneled in dark wood, with the judge's high bench dominating the front of the room. We took our seats at the petitioner's table. Derek and his attorney sat across the aisle. Yvette, Renee, and Dominique sat in the front row of the gallery, positioning themselves perfectly, so I could see their smug, triumphant faces every time I turned my head. The presiding judge, a no-nonsense man named Judge Harrison, called the court to order. He looked down at the massive stack of legal files documenting our divorce, the contested assets, and Derek's emergency personal bankruptcy claim. We are here to resolve the dissolution of marriage and the division of marital assets and liabilities, Judge Harrison stated, his voice booming across the quiet room. Given the complex nature of the financial disclosures, I want to hear directly from the petitioner first. Mr. Derek, please take the stand. Derek stood up confidently, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and walked over to the witness stand. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the absolute truth under penalty of perjury. He sat down and immediately shifted his demeanor, morphing perfectly into the role of the devastated, financially ruined husband. His attorney stood up and began the questioning. Derek painted a tragic, completely fabricated picture of our marriage. He testified under oath that he had tried desperately to build a financial legacy for our family, but the harsh economic climate had completely destroyed his corporate logistics career. He claimed that he had lost absolutely everything. "I am completely broke, Your Honor," Derek said, looking directly at the judge with a masterfully crafted expression of deep sorrow. "My business ventures failed entirely. I had to file for federal bankruptcy protection just to survive. I have absolutely zero liquid assets, zero corporate equity, and zero property to my name. All I have is a mountain of debt." His attorney nodded sympathetically. "And regarding the $2.5 million commercial business loan tied to your joint marital holding company, how do you propose we handle that massive liability today?" Derek sighed heavily, looking over at me with fake agonizing pity. "I accept that the loan is in total default, but I have no money to pay it. Since my wife is legally listed on the joint holding company, the debt belongs to her public relations agency now. It breaks my heart, but I cannot save her from her own financial obligations. She has to absorb the marital debt." I sat perfectly still, listening to him perjure himself effortlessly. He was actively lying to a federal judge. He was claiming poverty while fully knowing he had just purchased a lucrative commercial plaza. Derek's attorney then moved to the most critical part of their legal strategy. He needed to ensure that I could never, ever touch the commercial plaza in the divorce settlement. He called Yvette and Renee to the witness stand one by one to officially detach the multi-million-dollar asset from Derek's portfolio. Yvette took the stand first. She raised her right hand and swore under oath to tell the truth. Derek's attorney asked her to clarify her exact legal and financial relationship to the commercial property located in Midtown Atlanta. "That building belongs entirely to me and my daughter Renee," Yvette declared loudly, her voice ringing with absolute arrogant certainty. "We are the sole registered owners on the property deed. We manage the tenants. We collect the rent. We own the building free and clear. And does your son Derek hold any equity, financial interest, or silent ownership in that specific commercial property?" the attorney asked, feeding her the exact question she needed to secure their stolen prize. "Absolutely not," Yvette stated, glaring directly at me from the witness box. "My son has zero connection to that building. He gifted it to us free and clear before his financial troubles began. It is our private property. His wife has absolutely no right to claim any portion of it in this divorce." Renee took the stand next. She wore the exact same smug, defiant expression as her mother. She raised her hand, swore under penalty of perjury, and aggressively corroborated every single lie. "Derek does not own a single brick of that plaza," Renee testified, smoothly adjusting her diamond bracelet for the judge to see. "My mother and I are the exclusive legal owners. The property is 100% ours. We have the legal deed to prove it." I watched them dig their own financial graves with sheer, unrestrained enthusiasm. They were trying to build an impenetrable legal wall around the commercial plaza to ensure the family court judge could not force them to sell the building to pay off the marital debt. They thought they were being incredibly clever. They thought they had successfully isolated the asset from the liability. They were gleefully swearing under oath that they were the sole exclusive owners of the building. What they did not understand was that by legally claiming absolute ownership of the property under oath, they were simultaneously claiming absolute liability for whatever happened to that exact property. They were blindly walking into the most devastating financial trap in Atlanta history, and they were smiling widely while they did it. Derek's attorney confidently rested his case. He sat down looking extremely satisfied. Yvette and Renee returned to their seats in the gallery next to Dominique. Dominique leaned over and whispered something into Yvette's ear. They both looked at me and laughed quietly, fully believing the trial was basically over. They believed they had won completely. Judge Harrison organized his notes and looked down at the bench. He turned his attention toward the respondents' table where Elijah and I were sitting in absolute chilling silence. Counsel Judge Harrison said, his voice echoing in the large courtroom. The petitioner has clearly stated under oath that he is completely bankrupt and holds zero assets. Furthermore, his family members have testified under penalty of perjury that the commercial plaza in question belongs solely and exclusively to them. Based on these sworn statements, the petitioner is requesting that your client, Valerie, absorb the entirety of the defaulted $2.5 million commercial loan. The judge took off his reading glasses and leaned forward. Does the respondent have any counterclaims to this assertion? Does your client have any evidence to present before I make my final ruling on the division of these marital assets and liabilities? The entire courtroom fell dead silent. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the room were shut tight. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit above us. Derek watched me with a dark, victorious smirk. Yvette crossed her arms, waiting for me to finally break down and cry, just like I had during the mediation. They were waiting for my complete humiliating surrender. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I sat up perfectly straight, my spine rigid, my expression completely devoid of any emotion. I looked directly into Derek's eyes, allowing him to see the absolute terrifying void of my mercy. The smirk on his face slowly began to falter. Elijah stood up from the heavy wooden table. He buttoned his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate, and highly predatory motion. He did not carry a massive stack of defensive legal arguments. He did not carry financial appeals or desperate pleas for judicial mercy. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a single thick, sealed white envelope. "Yes, Your Honor," Elijah said. His voice was incredibly calm, but it carried a sharp, lethal edge that instantly commanded the attention of every single person in the room. "We actually have one very specific document we would like to submit for the court's immediate review regarding the absolute ownership of that commercial debt." Elijah stepped out from behind our table and began walking slowly across the polished courtroom floor, holding the sealed envelope out in front of him. The trap was officially finally triggered. He stopped directly in front of the elevated wooden bench. The entire fraudulent family stared in absolute breathless anticipation as the judge reached down to take it. Judge Harrison accepted the thick white envelope from Elijah. The crisp rustle of the paper seemed to echo loudly across the silent courtroom. As the judge reached for his reading glasses, I felt a sharp, sudden movement to my right. Yvette had leaned forward in the gallery row just behind my chair. She was close enough that I could smell her expensive, heavy perfume. She leaned in toward my ear. "You will never get a single penny from our family again," Yvette whispered, her voice dripping with absolute venom and arrogant certainty. She thought her sworn testimony had completely sealed my fate. Beside her, Renee and Dominique shifted in their seats, both of them sneering at me with pure, unconcealed malice. "She does not deserve a thing," Renee muttered quietly to the pregnant mistress, fully believing that they had successfully protected their stolen kingdom. I did not flinch. I did not even turn my head to look at them. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the elevated wooden bench where the judge was carefully breaking the seal of the envelope. Elijah stepped back and returned to the respondents' table, taking his seat beside me with a completely unbothered, lethal calm. He smoothed his tailored suit jacket and waited for the bomb to officially detonate. Judge Harrison pulled a stack of heavily certified legal documents from the envelope. He adjusted his glasses and began to read the first page. The courtroom remained completely silent, the tension thick and suffocating. Derek sat across the aisle, his hands folded neatly on the table, still playing the role of the tragic, destitute husband. He looked incredibly confident. He assumed Elijah had just submitted a desperate last-minute plea for spousal support, or a futile request to delay the bankruptcy proceedings. He had absolutely no idea that his entire world was about to collapse. The judge flipped to the second page of the document. He read the text slowly, his brow furrowing slightly as he processed the complex financial language. Then he flipped to the third page. He looked at the certified banking stamps, the authorized signatures, and the official transfer records. Suddenly, the tense silence of the courtroom was broken by an unexpected sound. Judge Harrison let out a loud, genuine burst of laughter. He quickly covered his mouth with his hand, trying to regain his professional judicial composure, but a wide, deeply amused smile remained plastered across his face. He shook his head, looking down at the papers with utter disbelief. "Oh," he muttered softly, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone on his desk. "This is good. This is very good." The confident, smug expression on Derek's face instantly vanished. He sat up completely straight, his eyes darting frantically between his expensive attorney and the laughing judge. Yvette and Renee stopped whispering in the gallery behind me. The heavy, arrogant atmosphere they had brought into the room suddenly evaporated, replaced by a sudden creeping sense of dread. "Your Honor," Derek's attorney said, standing up quickly, his voice tight with sudden panic. "May I ask what exactly the respondent has submitted to the court?" Judge Harrison took off his reading glasses and looked directly at Derek's lawyer. He then shifted his gaze toward the gallery, locking his eyes specifically on Yvette and Renee. His amused expression hardened into something incredibly sharp and legally unforgiving. "Counsel," the judge began, his voice booming with absolute authority. "Your client, Derek, just testified under oath that he is completely bankrupt and holds zero assets. Furthermore, his mother and sister just took the witness stand and swore under penalty of perjury that they are the sole exclusive owners of the commercial plaza located in Midtown Atlanta. They testified very clearly that your client has absolutely no equity in that building." "Yes, Your Honor," Derek's attorney replied, his voice wavering slightly. "That is correct. We established that the property is not a marital asset and therefore cannot be touched in this divorce proceeding." Judge Harrison nodded slowly, picking up the certified documents Elijah had submitted. He held the thick stack of papers up for the entire courtroom to see. "Well, counsel," the judge said, leaning forward, "it appears the respondent has no intention of claiming the commercial plaza as a marital asset. Instead, she has submitted official certified documentation regarding the defaulted $2.5 million commercial loan attached to that specific property." Derek's face turned the color of ash. He gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table, his knuckles turning completely white. Yvette let out a sharp, confused gasp from the gallery. "This document is a formal assignment of debt." Judge Harrison continued, his voice relentless and echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "It proves that a Delaware-based blind trust officially purchased the entire $2,500,000 defaulted commercial loan from Apex Financial Partners earlier this week. The transaction has been completely finalized, legally recorded, and officially stamped." Derek's attorney raised his hands defensively. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I fail to see how a third-party corporate debt buyout has any relevance to this specific divorce proceeding." Judge Harrison gave the attorney a deeply pitying look. He flipped to the final page of the document and pointed directly at the authorized signature line. "It is highly relevant, counsel, because the blind trust that purchased this massive commercial debt is owned and controlled entirely by the respondent." Judge Harrison looked directly at me, a glimmer of profound respect in his eyes. "Valerie is the sole beneficiary and authorized executor of the trust. She is officially the primary creditor holding the mortgage to the commercial plaza." The absolute magnitude of the judge's words slammed into the courtroom with the devastating force of a freight train. Yvette let out a strangled, breathless sound, clapping her manicured hand over her mouth. Renee froze entirely, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. Dominique dropped her hand from her pregnant stomach, her jaw falling open in complete shock. Derek jumped up from his chair. "That is impossible," he shouted, completely abandoning his quiet, defeated victim persona. "She does not have that kind of liquid capital. She could not possibly buy a $2 million commercial loan." "Mr. Derek, sit down immediately," the judge commanded fiercely. banging his wooden gavel against the sounding block. The financial documentation is heavily certified and completely ironclad. Your wife legally owns the debt. And because of the sworn testimony your family just provided in my courtroom today, you have all walked directly into a massive irreversible financial trap. Derek slowly sank back into his chair, his body trembling violently. He stared at me with wide, horrified eyes, finally realizing exactly what I had done to him. Judge Harrison turned his full, wrathful attention toward Yvette and Renee sitting in the gallery. You two women stood before this court and eagerly swore under oath that you are the sole exclusive owners of that commercial building, the judge stated, his voice ringing with brutal, terrifying clarity. You did this specifically to hide the asset from the marital estate. But by legally claiming absolute exclusive ownership of the property, you have simultaneously claimed absolute liability for the active mortgage attached to it. Yvette began to shake. She looked at her son, desperate for him to fix the catastrophic disaster, but Derek was completely paralyzed. The judge delivered the final crushing blow. Because you claim the property, and because Valerie now legally owns the defaulted debt attached to that exact property, you are now personally, legally liable to her. You do not own a free and clear commercial building. You owe Valerie $2,500,000 payable immediately due to your active default status. You did not protect your precious assets today. You simply volunteered to pay this woman millions of dollars. The color drained completely from their arrogant faces. The blood rushed out of their cheeks, leaving them looking like hollow, terrified ghosts. Yvette's designer Gucci suit suddenly looked ridiculous on her trembling, defeated frame. Renee's diamond tennis bracelet clattered noisily against the wooden bench as her arms went entirely limp. They had walked into the courthouse fully intending to leave me homeless, bankrupt, and utterly destroyed. They had conspired to fund a secret life, build a luxury spa for a mistress, and steal my business capital. They thought their blatant perjury would secure their stolen wealth forever. Instead, their own boundless greed and breathtaking arrogance had firmly locked the chains around their own wrists. They owed me millions. They could never pay it. And they knew exactly what that meant. I sat perfectly still at the petitioner's table, looking back at the family that had tried to bury me. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just watched them slowly suffocate under the crushing, magnificent weight of absolute justice. Their meticulously planned deception had finally imploded right before their very eyes, destroying their entire futures completely today. The heavy silence that had fallen over the courtroom shattered into absolute pandemonium. Yvette let out a piercing, hysterical wail, grabbing her chest as if she were having a sudden heart attack. She slumped heavily against the wooden gallery bench, her designer handbag crashing to the floor, spilling luxury cosmetics and expensive silk scarves across the polished tiles. Renee scrambled to her feet, her hands frantically waving in the air as she looked up at the elevated bench. "Your Honor," Renee shouted, completely abandoning all courtroom decorum. "We made a mistake. We do not own that building. Derek forced us to put our names on the deed. We are just holding it for him. We do not have $2.5 million to pay her. You have to reverse my testimony right now." Judge Harrison slammed his wooden gavel down with terrifying force. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, silencing Renee's frantic, desperate outburst. "Sit down immediately," the judge roared. His face flushed with profound judicial anger. "You do not get to rewrite your sworn testimony simply because you suddenly realize you walked into a financial trap of your own making. You swore under penalty of perjury that you were the sole exclusive owners of that commercial plaza. You actively conspired to hide a massive marital asset from this court. You are legally bound to that property, and you are legally bound to the defaulted debt currently crushing it." Derek jumped up from the petitioner's table. His carefully crafted victim persona was completely gone, replaced by wild, unhinged desperation. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "She orchestrated this," Derek yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "She bought that debt specifically to ruin my family. This is extortion, Your Honor. She cannot legally enforce a commercial foreclosure during an active divorce proceeding. The federal bankruptcy court protects my marital assets." Elijah stood up slowly from his chair. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket and looked at Derek with an expression of pure, unadulterated professional disgust. Actually, Elijah said, his voice slicing through the chaotic courtroom like a surgical scalpel. We absolutely can enforce the foreclosure today. And we are not just seizing the commercial plaza. Elijah reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a second, much thicker stack of heavily certified legal documents. He walked forward and placed the paperwork directly on the judge's bench. Derek froze, his eyes locked on the new files. Your Honor. Elijah continued smoothly, turning to face the courtroom. When Derek originally secured the $2.5 million commercial loan from Apex Financial Partners 7 years ago, the bank required secondary collateral to guarantee the massive debt. Derek executed a cross-collateralization agreement. He legally pledged the primary marital residence located in Buckhead as the secondary security for the commercial plaza loan. Derek's legs gave out completely. He collapsed back into his wooden chair, his mouth hanging open in silent, absolute horror. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had locked me out in the rain just a few weeks ago. Because the primary commercial loan has been in severe intentional default for over 4 months. Elijah stated, his voice ringing with devastating authority. The creditor holds the immediate legal right to foreclose on all collateral attached to the debt. My client, Valerie, is the sole owner of the blind trust currently holding that exact debt. Therefore, she is officially executing her right to immediately foreclose on the commercial plaza in Midtown Atlanta and the multi-million-dollar residential property located in Buckhead. The courtroom erupted again, but this time, the screaming did not come from Yvette or Renee. It came directly from Dominique. The 26-year-old pregnant mistress leapt up from her seat in the gallery. She stared at Derek, her eyes wide with sheer, unrestrained terror and sudden, violent realization. The arrogant smirk she had worn all morning had completely vanished, replaced by the frantic, panicked expression of a woman who was watching her stolen kingdom burn to ashes. Dominique shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the room. What is he talking about? The spa is inside that commercial plaza. You told me the spa belonged to me. You told me I owned the lease. Derek could not even look at her. He buried his face in his trembling hands, completely unable to answer. And the house, Dominique continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch as she pointed a shaking finger at me. You told me the house in Buckhead was ours. You said you were taking it from her in the divorce. We moved all my things into the master bedroom. We set up the nursery. You said she could not touch the house because of the bankruptcy. Judge Harrison banged his gavel again, leaning aggressively over the elevated bench to stare directly down at my husband. Your mistress is absolutely correct about one thing, Mr. Derek, the judge said, his tone dripping with lethal judicial fury. Your wife cannot touch the marital home in a standard divorce proceeding while a federal bankruptcy stay is actively in place. However, your wife is no longer acting as a standard spouse in this specific courtroom. She is acting as your primary secured commercial creditor. And bankruptcy laws do not protect a debtor from a secured creditor executing a lawful foreclosure on defaulted collateral. The judge picked up the cross-collateralization agreement Elijah had just submitted and reviewed the certified signatures. By deliberately defaulting on the commercial loan to bankrupt your wife, Judge Harrison explained, outlining the brutal, inescapable reality of Derek's own monumental stupidity, you effectively triggered the foreclosure of your own primary residence. You handed her the legal right to seize both properties simultaneously. Dominique let out a visceral, piercing scream. She lunged forward, grabbing the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the main floor. You lied to me, Dominique yelled at Derek, her face contorted with absolute rage. You told me I was marrying a wealthy man. You told me you were a powerful executive. You are nothing. You are broke. You gave my spa to her. You gave my house to her. Where am I supposed to go now? Where am I supposed to raise this baby? She turned her furious, tear-filled eyes toward Yvette and Renee. And you two helped him lie. You told me he was a catch. You told me I was upgrading my life. You are all broke, pathetic frauds. Yvette tried to stand up to defend herself, her face flushed dark red with extreme embarrassment. She opened her mouth to shout back at the young mistress she had so eagerly welcomed into her home, but the overwhelming stress of the situation finally caught up with her. Yvette's eyes rolled into the back of her head. Her knees buckled completely, and she collapsed hard onto the wooden floor of the gallery in a dead faint. Renee screamed, dropping to her knees to shake her unconscious mother, begging someone to call for medical assistance. The courtroom was descending into absolute madness, but Judge Harrison was not finished. He motioned for the bailiffs to assist the fainting woman in the gallery, then turned his furious, unrelenting gaze back down to my husband. "Mr. Derrick," the judge said, his voice easily cutting through the loud, chaotic screaming of the two women. "You walked into my courtroom today and swore under oath that you were entirely destitute. You filed official federal bankruptcy paperwork, claiming you had lost all your assets. Yet the forensic financial evidence presented today clearly proves that you deliberately transferred a multi-million-dollar commercial asset to your mother and sister specifically to hide it from the marital estate and shield it from federal creditors." Derek shook his head frantically, tears finally spilling from his eyes. "Your Honor, please. I was just trying to protect my family. I did not want to lose everything." "You did not protect anyone." Judge Harrison fired back instantly. "You committed blatant, calculated federal bankruptcy fraud. You committed gross perjury on the official court record today. You used fraudulent financial filings to maliciously attempt to ruin your wife's successful business. You weaponized the judicial system to execute a vindictive, illegal financial attack." The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel. "I am officially dismissing your emergency petition for divorce and revoking the fraudulent restraining order you secured against your wife," the judge declared loudly. "I am formally granting the respondent Valerie immediate exclusive control of both the commercial plaza in Midtown and the residential property in Buckhead to fully satisfy the defaulted commercial debt. The eviction protocols for both properties may begin immediately." Derek let out a loud, pathetic sob, burying his face in his hands. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued ignoring Derek's tears completely. "I am officially forwarding the entire transcript of today's proceedings, along with all financial documentation submitted by the Respondents' Counsel directly to the United States Attorney's Office. I am formally recommending you for immediate criminal investigation regarding federal bankruptcy fraud, asset concealment, and perjury. I suggest you retain a very good criminal defense attorney, Mr. Derrick. You are going to need one." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down for the final time. The sharp, decisive sound signaled the absolute, irreversible end of my husband's freedom and his family's entire arrogant existence. "Court is adjourned," the judge announced, standing up and sweeping quickly out of the room. I stood up from the respondents' table. I slowly smoothed the front of my tailored navy blue suit, ensuring there was not a single wrinkle in the fabric. I picked up my designer purse and looked over at Elijah. My attorney was already packing his briefcase, a look of profound, quiet satisfaction resting on his sharp features. We had executed the crisis management strategy flawlessly. The threat was completely neutralized. The enemy was absolutely destroyed. I turned and walked slowly down the center aisle of the courtroom. The noise around me was deafening. Dominique was still screaming at Derek, calling him a useless, broke liar, while demanding he figure out how to save her luxury spa. Renee was sobbing loudly on the floor, fanning her unconscious mother's face while cursing my name. Derek remained slumped at his table, paralyzed by the terrifying reality of his impending federal criminal charges. They were viciously tearing each other apart. The toxic, enabling family dynamic that had proudly funded his affair and celebrated my downfall had instantly evaporated the second the stolen money vanished. They had turned into ravenous, desperate animals fighting over the ashes of the empire I had just burned to the ground. I did not stop to gloat. I did not look back to offer any parting insults or dramatic declarations of victory. They simply were not worth another second of my valuable time. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the quiet, brightly lit hallway. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since the moment my credit card declined at the charity gala was finally completely gone. I took a deep, steadying breath of the cool, air-conditioned air, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace settle deep into my bones. I had survived the worst betrayal of my life, and I had emerged stronger, richer, and entirely victorious. I walked toward the elevators, ready to begin my brand new life. 6 months have passed since those heavy wooden doors closed behind me at the courthouse. The dust from the chaotic explosion has finally settled across the bustling city of Atlanta, leaving a vastly different landscape in its wake. The empire my husband and his toxic family tried to build on my back collapsed, completely burying them under the crushing weight of their own boundless greed. Derek is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. The United States Attorney's Office did not show him an ounce of mercy. When the federal investigators audited his financial records, they uncovered a massive trail of bank fraud, asset concealment, and perjury. He lost his lucrative corporate logistics career the moment the indictment was handed down. He went from wearing imported Italian linen suits to a standard-issue prison uniform entirely stripped of the arrogant pride he used to wield like a weapon. Yvette and Renee faced an equally devastating reality. When I officially foreclosed on the commercial plaza and the Buckhead residential property, they were left with absolutely nothing. The massive legal fees they incurred trying to fight the inevitable completely drained whatever small savings they had hidden away. They were forced to declare total bankruptcy. Today they are renting a cramped, outdated 2-bedroom apartment deep in the sprawling suburbs. It is the exact same modest working-class neighborhood they used to mock mercilessly at their elite social club luncheons. They no longer attend high society galas or host lavish catered barbecues. Their wealthy friends abandoned them the second the scandal became public knowledge. As for Dominique, her fantasy of becoming a pampered, wealthy matriarch vanished the instant she realized Derek was broke and heading to federal prison. She left him before the trial even concluded. Without the stolen funds from my public relations agency to finance her lifestyle, she lost her designer wardrobe and her luxury vehicle. Last I heard, she was working the drive-through window at a local fast food chain, struggling to support herself and her baby without the stolen financial safety net she had proudly bragged about. I am standing right now on the top floor of the commercial plaza in Midtown Atlanta. The building belongs entirely to me. It is no longer a monument to my husband's infidelity. It is the towering physical manifestation of my hard-won independence. I completely gutted the interior of the suite that used to house Dominique's stolen luxury day spa. I ripped out the velvet seating areas, tore down the crystal chandeliers, and smashed the frosted glass windows. I replaced them with sleek modern steel accents and open-concept workspaces. I transformed her palace of betrayal into the brand-new, highly expanded headquarters for my public relations agency. My business is thriving more than ever before. The story of my corporate debt buyout circulated quietly among the highest tiers of the Atlanta financial elite. My clients saw exactly how ruthlessly I handled my own catastrophic crisis, and they realized I was the only woman they would ever trust to protect their empires. My roster of billionaire clients doubled overnight. I look out through the massive glass windows of my corner office, watching the busy city streets below. The afternoon sun reflects brightly off the surrounding skyscrapers, casting a warm, golden glow across the skyline. I feel a profound, unshakable sense of peace radiating through my chest. For years, I believed that my worth was tied to my ability to provide a perfect family life for Derek. I allowed Yvette and Renee to make me feel inadequate because I could not meet their impossible toxic standards. I thought family meant enduring disrespect in the name of loyalty. I know better now. I learned the hard way that true family has absolutely nothing to do with blood or marriage certificates. Family is defined by genuine respect, unwavering support, and mutual trust. My real family consists of the brilliant, dedicated people who stood by me when I had nothing but a ruined corporate credit card and a locked front door. Elijah, who fought relentlessly to protect my assets in court. Xavier, who provided the massive capital to save my business without asking a single question. My incredible agency staff who held the entire company safely together while I navigated the darkest storm of my entire life. They are my chosen family, and they have proven their loyalty 1,000 times over today. Sometimes the absolute only way to beat toxic people is to step back and let their own magnificent greed dig their deepest graves. You do not have to scream, and you do not have to seek violent revenge. You simply have to firmly know your own worth, understand the rules of the game better than they do, and strike with cold, calculated precision when the perfect moment naturally arrives. They confidently tried to deliberately leave me with a massive, crushing debt, and instead, they blindly handed me the golden keys to a kingdom they could never possibly afford to keep. Have you ever had to use the rules against someone who tried to break you? Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep that it forced you to completely reinvent yourself to survive? Share your personal story in the comments below right now. I read every single one, and I know exactly how much power there is in realizing you are not alone in your struggles. Please remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of surviving the unimaginable. Your support helps build a strong community of resilient, brilliant individuals who actively refuse to ever be defeated by the cruelty of others again. Thank you so much for listening to my journey today. I truly appreciate all the love and the amazing encouragement you continuously provide me. Stay incredibly strong. Always know your absolute worth. And please never let anyone steal your hard-earned power and hard-earned peace of mind right now. Goodbye.